Parents now on the hook for kid chaos. A new ordinance in a South Jersey town says parents and legal guardians must answer for their child's public disturbances should they fail to stop them from committing certain offenses and mayhem. The consequences are hefty.
A town in South Jersey has decided that they have had absolutely enough with teen violence, with youths coming down in large groups or gatherings, as the mayor of Chicago likes to call them, mobbing up and attacking businesses and residents. And essentially, they've passed a law that says, look, if your kid keeps coming to these events and keeps tearing stuff up, keeps attacking people, keeps looting and committing all sorts of crimes, we are going to hold you accountable after they commit a certain number of offenses, because in many of these cases, what the prosecutors have ended up figuring out is that parents end up dropping their children off, their teens, their youths at these events in order to run amok unsupervised, even if they know they're going to meet up with a group of like 100 teens in order to commit these crimes. And they've seen this time and time again. This is a problem throughout this country on a bunch of different towns and a bunch of different areas. It surrounds regular public events, annual holidays and whatnot, and it's ridiculous and absurd. And now they're deciding to take a step to hold the parents accountable for the actions of their children. And this is what we're going to talk about today. Something we've touched on before, but before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
Parents could now face fines or even jail time if they fail to stop their children from breaking the law in one South Jersey town. It comes in recent response to recent incidents where large groups of unruly teens cause chaos at public events.
So we've actually touched on this in a previous video on this channel, specifically when it comes to Gloucester Township and how they decided that they were going to cancel their annual festival, Gloucester Township Day, due to the fact that you have mobs of mostly black teens showing up, causing problems, getting into brawls, and of course destroying private property. And this has shaken the township. They normally would take their families to these kinds of events, but unlike many other cities across this union that end up ignoring the problem, pretending that it doesn't exist, or in Brandon Johnson's case, excusing the problem, saying that these youths, they're just in poverty and they're attacking people and breaking stuff just because they don't have enough midnight basketball, Gloucester Township in New Jersey has decided to take a different tact. In this particular case, what they're saying is, look, if you're not supervising your kids, if you're not doing your job as a parent, you're not going to be charged with the exact same crime that your kid commits, but if they are a repeat offender, we are going to hold you to account to a certain extent, because we just can't have this. The idea that we have to cancel every single event across the United States of America due to the fact that mobs of black teens show up and start committing crimes is an absurdity that this town does not want to engage with. And 1 year's cancellation is more than enough for them. And we talked about this before and the outrage related to this, but now the ordinance has passed and we actually can have a look at what we're seeing. And by the way, we've actually seen other prosecutions of other parents. Typically they're white parents, and in a lot of those cases they're related to mass shootings or something of the sort. So this is not unusual, but in fact this law actually has more care in it, in that the parents are charged with some form of child neglect, not taking responsibility for their kids, not raising them properly, rather than in those cases where it seems like the parents were being charged just as severely or nearly as severely as the parents for the offense that their child actually committed. Now, let's hear a little bit more so you can understand. We're going to get the perspective from some people in and around this area, and then I want you guys to let me know what you think about this new ordinance.
Gloucester Township Day this year was canceled because of what unfolded last year. Officials now introducing this new level of accountability, hoping to crack down on some of that bad behavior. Under a new ordinance in Gloucester Township, parents and guardians of minors involved in public disturbances could face fines or even jail time.
These are your children. Had you governed them a certain way, this ordinance wouldn't be necessary.
The new law is in response to incidents of youth misbehavior, including at last year's Gloucester Township Day, where fights broke out and hundreds of teens caused chaos at Veterans Park and a nearby shopping center.
So we end up hearing from a local resident who says, yeah, it's on the parents. They should be held to account. If you are raising your children properly, we would not have this issue. And then the local news media starts using code words where they're like, the youth was creating chaos in these particular events, when in reality, they were rioting, starting brawls, and they weren't just making trouble at a nearby strip mall. What they were actually doing was breaking in and looting said strip mall. They were destroying the place, and New Jersey, at least in this particular town, has had enough. And the crazy thing about this is that this problem is so prevalent at different events throughout the country that we've seen a number of responses, a number of efforts in order to nerf this, and one of the most famous ones was from Myrtle Beach during Black Bike Week, which sees violence each and every year in response to this particular event, where a bunch of businesses decided that they were no longer going to be open during this holiday week, despite the fact that you have a bunch of tourists coming into town. In fact, they actually decided that they were going to board up said businesses, prepare for the violence, prepare for the riots, because in reality, it was just not worth it based on the damage that occurred each and every year for them to stay open. And what was the response by the NAACP? Did they condemn the black youths for their violence? Did they say that they understood where the businesses were coming from and try to work towards a solution? No, they actually sued the businesses for not being open for racial discrimination because the businesses didn't want to engage with rioters each and every year during this event that saw a large portion of black people, black teens, come in for this particular event. Again, ignoring reality, in fact, trying to force people in order to suffer under the reality of black teen violence seems to be the norm in this country, but this town in New Jersey said absolutely not. We're not going to deal with it in that way. We're going to target the parents because they know if businesses shut down, then they'll really not have an event in the first place. And of course, they will become vulnerable to lawsuits by black organizations that find it evil, white, and racist that you don't want to be attacked by a black mob or have your business looted during the course of a regular, ordinary holiday or commemorative celebration, as is the case with this particular incident.
As a parent, I think it's absolutely necessary.
So again, we have a parent saying as a mother, she supports it. This happens to be a black woman for those of you who are listening via podcasting form. And I 100% understand this from her perspective because a lot of people, including black people, want to enjoy these events, but other people's kids tend to be causing the problems. And by the way, a lot of times these groups become so enormous that what ends up happening is that young kids who don't make good decisions in the first place end up joining up, bolstering those numbers and causing more damage because, again, a certain segment of the population is not only not watching their children, but as we found out in the previous segment that we covered, they're actually dropping their kids off into these massive groups in order to storm these events. And of course, chaos is the consequence of that. Of course, violence is the consequence of their dereliction of duty as parents. But of course, the local news media has to give the other side of this. The local news media can't let this narrative of people being sick of black teen violence go unchallenged. So we end up hearing about how this is going to create so many hardships because I don't know if you guys know this. I don't know if you guys are aware of this. It turns out that these kids that are committing crimes, attacking each other and ruining multiple different events, innocent Beba and Joel Laddins who didn't do nothing wrong. And honestly, they just come from poor backgrounds. So what you need to do is actually increase welfare spending on them, not fine the parents for repeatedly dropping their kids off, knowing that they're going to commit violence and not giving a damn about those consequences.
While some support the move, others oppose it, saying the law could cause hardship for some families.
That may put the parent in a situation to either lose their job or lose finances. Let it go through the course the way it usually does.
Good. I'm glad that the parents will lose finances, and I'm glad that they'll suffer the consequences because they're not doing their job as parents. And he says, let it go through the courts the way it normally does. But New Jersey, like a bunch of different states, post Black Lives Matter riots, post the death of George Floyd, passed a bunch of different reforms that specifically enable juvenile criminals. So what what he's saying, whether he knows it or not, about letting it go through the courts as normal, is that he wants the kids to suffer no consequences, to get a slap on the wrist, to get a free pass, to be allowed to terrorize these holiday weekends, because God forbid those poor innocent Beba Angel parents who are dropping their kids off at these locations knowing that they're going to commit crimes suffer the consequences for what they're doing and the impact that it has on the community.
In a statement to Action News, Gloucester Township Police said each incident is still and always will be handled on a case-by-case basis, taking into account the specific situation and the totality of circumstances. Similar chaos has erupted at events statewide in towns like Seaside Heights and Mays Landing this year. In June, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy signed the public brawl law into state code. It allows authorities to charge anyone who starts a brawl.
So look, the police chief in this particular area says that they're going to look at the circumstances on a case-by-case basis. They're not just going to charge parents willy-nilly with all these different crimes. Essentially, what they're looking for is the specific parents that drop their kids off or don't care what their kids are doing, and it's a repeat problem. Those are the ones that they're going to go after with fines and fees, and eventually it could lead to jail time. So this makes sense to me. New Jersey's public brawl law makes sense to me, although I will note that these black mobs attacking people time and time again have occurred without any outrage from the state government. It was only in that Seaside Heights incident, which had a lot of white people involved that were coming out after clubs, that Governor Murphy decided to step up. But you know what? If this law is actually put into place, even if it's in response to rare instances of white people doing group violence, and that ends up actually impacting the much more common instances of black teen mob violence, then I'm totally fine with that, even if, of course, the excuse that they used was white people acting badly in the rare circumstances rather than the much more common instances that we're seeing across all these different various townships.
People hope new measures locally and statewide will make a difference.
I have 4 kids, and my youngest, she can't even experience like that fun stuff that we have in town because of, other kids acting out.
So here we have another parent who talks about how she can't bring her kids to different various events. Her kids can never experience the fun community side of these particular towns. And the reason why is because you have these teens tearing up the place, and it's just not a safe location for her to bring her family. And by the way, we saw in Cincinnati, which is labeled as a brawl, but of course on video what we see, it was a black mob attacking 3 white individuals, including sucker punching a white woman on camera. That not only do these violent instances occur, and not only are they quite common, but when they do occur, you have all these different various institutions that typically bend the knee to the attacker and try to figure out a way to blame the white people who end up getting attacked, even the white woman who was sucker punched, for the violence that was inflicted upon them. So yeah, you need to have something to change the culture in this area, because not only do these teens know that they're not going to be prosecuted due to juvenile reforms, but they also know that media coverage is going to be scant and they're not going to be named and shamed. So maybe, just maybe, when it becomes an issue for their families, when they start feeling the consequences, we'll actually see some parenting going on.
This new ordinance here in Gloucester Township lists 28 offenses ranging from felonies to minor infractions like loitering or breaking curfew. Now, if a child is found guilty in juvenile court repeatedly, well, that's when a parent or guardian could face 90 days in jail.
So look, this stuff is clear and obvious to me. Again, a lot of people on my previous video were saying that it was wrong, that if a kid commits a theft, the parent be charged with theft, but that is not what's happening right here. It was never what was proposed. What they're talking about is that if your kid is constantly breaking curfew, if your kid is constantly engaging in brawls, if your kid is constantly making events like the Township Week we saw last year into terrible events to the point where they have to cancel it, then yes, you will face some consequences after it happens a number of times. And the reason why is because you are supposed to take accountability for your child's actions, and we can't have a society where every single kid gets a slap on the wrist, gets treated like an innocent Beba Angel Aladdin, where we pretend we don't know the difference between a 17-year-old and a 1-year-old baby, and the parents parents face no accountability for letting them run amok. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on the social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about New Jersey, tackling black mob violence. Till next time.